Greetings and salutations, scholars. Your friendly neighborhood Swedish sinology nerd here. Oh hey, an honest to Jade Emperor etymology video. It's been a hot minute since I made one of these. Today we'll be looking at the three characters xue, to learn, jiao, to teach, and jue, to awaken. Now, this threesome has long been seen as close kin, so instead of taking on each of them on their own, I thought we might as well get us all a big ol' stick of butter and jam all three into one tight little episode.
What is my purpose?
You grease me up, woman!
So now that I've got y'all good and greased up, let's do some etymology. Long-time viewers will ken by the tingling in their cherry plums that quotes from the Shoven this way comes. Let's start with xue, to learn. Xue, jue wu ye. To learn is to be awaken. Mr. Duan's commentary points out that xue and jue rhyme, xue, jue, die yun, showing the link between the two, for as I've said before, the Chinese believed that same-sounding words were akin to each other in meaning. Cong jiao, cong mi, from jiao, to teach, and mi, cover. Mi, shang meng ye. Mi stands for still being in the dark or unlettered, which the Chinese liken to having a strip of cloth covering one's eyes. Jiu sheng, jiu, mortar, gives the reading.
Eat mortar! Eat lead!
Xue, zhuanwen xue sheng. Here, Mr. Xu makes it clear that he thinks of today's full form xue to be an offshoot of the full form in holding pu to strike. Already, we can see that Xu Shen thought of xue, jiao, and jue as being closely linked. Xue rhymes with jue, and jiao is the semantic component in xue. However, the Kangxi wordbook draws a line between xue, to study, and xiao, to teach, and criticizes writers who use them interchangeably. For now, let's put a pin in that, as there will be room to discuss this discrepancy in more detail later. Next up is jiao, to teach. Jiao, shang suo shi, xia suo xiao ye. To teach. That which the overling does is what the underling follows. It might seem odd to talk of teaching in this way, since in the West we don't tend to think of teachers as being better than those they teach. Mind to Xu Shen and his fellow Confucians, teaching was less about book learning and more about rearing good morals among men, which was seen as one of the emperor's foremost plights. The Son of Heaven was, at least on paper, a sage king, and his work was to teach everyone under heaven good deeds, good speech, and good thoughts. This is likely whence Mr. Xu gets the whole overling-underling thought. Again, Mr. Duan's commentary points out that xiao, meaning to imitate, rhymes with jiao, to teach. Jiao xiao die yun. Nerd note! Shoven only provides us with one reading, jiao, represented in the Fanjie system as gu xiao qie. The later Kangxi dictionary does mention the first tone reading, but notes that the first and fourth tone readings mean the same. For this reason, I will mostly be referring to this character as jiao and not jiao, but we'll go deeper down that particular rabbit hole in a bit. Cong pu, cong jiao, from pu to strike and jiao to imitate. Note that the component is jiao and not xiao, filial piety. Jiao means to imitate, but does not appear anywhere in Chinese writing outside of the Shoven, at least until the unearthing of the oracle bone and bronzeware inscriptions, that is. The radical pu is often tacked onto a Chinese character to make it into a verb, and frequently has a causative meaning, so pu and jiao can be read as to make someone imitate, that is, to teach. Xu Shen also gives us two old forms of jiao, one made up of the same component jiao and yan, speech, and the other made up of yao, meaning hexagram from the I Ching, and pu, to strike. Finally, let's see what Xu Shen had to say about the character jue. Jue wu ye. Both jue and wu mean to awaken. Mr. Xu often explains a word with its synonym. However, Mr. Duan's commentary changes wu, awaken, to the same sounding wu, to realize. Wu and wu are kin words with close but sundry meanings. The first means to simply stop sleeping, and the other means to become aware of in a spiritual sense. Cong jian, xue sheng sheng. From jian, to see, and xue, to study, shortened down. From this we can guess that Xu Shen thought that Jie was an offshoot of Xue, mind that early Chinese thinkers didn't think of their characters as sundry from the words they stood for. So now that we know the traditional explanations for each of these three characters, let's have a look at how the unearthing of the oracle bone and bronzeware inscriptions would shed new light on their origins and development. Let's first have a look at the unfolding of the character Xue. Xue shows up in the oracle bone writings from the Shang dynasty, and as so often is the case, these writings show a lot of sundriness. The form we see most often is an X shape, likely a short form of Yao hexagram, over a roof. Sometimes two hands are tacked on, other times the X is doubled, and other times still we only see the hands and roof or the hands and Yao. This earliest form is strikingly unlike from what Xu Shen gives in his work. For one, we can see that the character has no kinship with Jiao whatsoever. Also, Mi to cover is in fact a roof, and what Mr. Xu identified as Jiu, mortar, is instead a pair of hands. An embarrassing oversight from Mr. Xu, I do say. All of the OB characters can be seen as the root of the top half of Xue, which nowadays is no longer thought of as its own character, though clearly it was a character in its own right in the Shang dynasty. Xue does not show up in any of the Shang era bronzeware, so we cannot know if the oracle bone forms are the same as those used in the other forms of writing at the time. Xue does however show up in the bronzeware from the Zhou dynasty, all of which have the character Zi, child, tacked on. Late in the dynasty towards the spring and autumn and warring states period, we also see a form with Pu to beat, fairly close to what Xu Shen tells us is the correct form. In the bamboo scrolls from Chu, Xue is shortened down, with Yao either written as a standing line or left out altogether. None of the forms from Chu have the Pu radical, and most don't inhold the roof element either. I guess the children of Chu just sat outside during classes. Oh hi, that sounds pretty lovely actually. Qin dynasty writing was, ill name notwithstanding, quite conservative, so the forms we see in the bamboo scrolls from Qin are structurally the same as those from the Zhou dynasty. Also note how the roof element is now written as Mi to cover, so mayhap Mr. Xu's earliest sources for this character did not go beyond the Qin dynasty. The clerical script from the Han dynasty and onward is much the same, but some write Yao as Wen, which, I don't know, I kinda like it. It fits somehow. The normal script is much the same, but on one hand we have Mr. Yan Zhenqing back on his bullshit, shortening the whole upper half of the character into 3 dots. On the other hand, we have other writers who write the top half like the character Yu, which I think looks pretty nifty. Another post-classical variant character is to write Xue as Wen, writing culture over Zi, child, which in my lowly way of seeing things is a way better simplified version than that 3-dotted thing. That's another L in the chat for the language reform research committee of China. All of these forms show up in a half longhand running script, only, written more flowingly. Lastly, in the grass script the character is pretty much identical to the modern simplified form, again proving my point that simplified characters are okay actually, but only in the grass script. The character Jiao to teach also shows up in the Shang dynasty oracle bone writings, where its makeup is mostly the same as today. In most of these characters we can clearly see Yao hexagram over Zi, child, and Pu to beat on the right. In a few happenings, the child is left out, leaving only Yao and Pu, looking much the same as on one of the old forms mentioned by Xu Shen. In the bronzeware writings of the Zhou dynasty, however, Yao is written like a hashtag for some reason. Mayhap even 2,000 years ago teachers had to tell them kids to stay off they damn cell phones. Notably, we see a few happenings, but the one really, of a form akin to the character Jiao to imitate, used in the bronzes. It's hard to say if this is Jiao to imitate borrowed to write Jiao to teach, or if this means that the former is but a way to write the latter. Mr. Xu Shen did have a habit of making up his own distinctions after all. I'll talk about this some more in a bit, but for now let's stay on target. We see quite a bit of sundriness in the Chu bamboo scroll writings from the Warring States era. Though some are but offshoots of earlier forms, above all I wish to show you these two. One has a Yao hexagram over Yan speech and Pu to beat on the right. The other, and most often seen in Chu writings, only has Yao, once again written like a hashtag, over Yan speech. You will call to mind that the other old form mentioned by Xu also had the Yan speech radical, though the layout is not fully the same. Now, I know I do give Mr. Xu the business a lot, but I am still stunned by how he manages to be mostly right about most things. The man is an absolute ledge. The character looks much the same in the Qin Dynasty clerical script. Starting with the Han Dynasty clerical script, we see Yao and Zi written as Xiao, filial piety, which quickly became the norm, as this is the form used in the normal script, the running script, and grass script respectively. And lastly, the character Jue. Unlike Xue and Jiao, the character Jue does not show up in the unearthed writings before the Qin Dynasty, where it looks mostly the same as today's form. Since the upper half of Jue and Xue are the same, we see a lot of overlap in how they are written. In the clerical script, Yao is sometimes written as Wen. In the normal script, at times the top is written as Yu, and of course Mr. Yan Zhenqing is also here with his triple dot nonsense. Notably, in the running script we almost only see the form with Yu at the top, while the grass script is all about them 3 dots. Some rare post-classical variants also exist. One is akin to Xue and swaps the top half out for Wen, writing or culture, while another calls to mind the old form of Jiao, made up of Jian to see and a Yao hexagram. There's also this halfway simplified version, which I understand is today's standard in Japanese, where the top half is simplified but the bottom half is not, which I guess is still better than the modern simplified form. Oh yes, I am terribly biased. What tipped you off? So now we know how these characters unfolded and changed over time, but we have one more piece of the puzzle to go, and in many ways it flips the table on what we've learned so far. Going by the work of Axel Schussler as well as Baxter and Segard, Xue to learn, Jiao to teach, and Jue to awaken are not, as has been the understanding for 2000 years, akin to each other. Instead, they belong to 2 sundry houses, alike in dignity, one made up of Xue and Jue, and the other made up of Jiao to teach, and another character we haven't talked too much about, that being the humble Xiao to imitate. Let's have a look at the first of these noble houses, the House of Jue. Baxter and Segard reconstruct the old Chinese reading of Jue as kruk, meaning to be aware, which has been traced back to Proto-Sino-Tibetan kruk, to rouse, to awaken, to disturb. The other reading of this character, Jiao, meaning to awaken, is reconstructed as kruks with an S suffix. There were many S suffixes in Old Chinese. This one, in Baxter and Segard's words, derives verbs of outward directed action out of verbs of inward directed action. Better out than in. In other words, it changes kruk, to be aware, into to awaken. This means that Jiao or kruks is an offshoot of the root word jue or kruk, meaning to be aware. Further, xue, to learn, is reconstructed as mkruk, which is jue or kruk with an m prefix tacked on at the front. Now, there were a handful of m prefixes in Old Chinese. This one, in Baxter and Segard's own words, changes a non-volitional verb into a volitional one, at times with causative overtones. That is, it changes a verb from being done unknowingly to being done knowingly. Thus, it changes jue, to be aware, into xue, to learn or to study. Same as the Kangxi wordbook, Baxter and Segard sets xue apart from xiao, to teach, which they reconstruct as mkruks, which is xue or mkruk with another s suffix tacked on at the end, changing it from an inward deed, learning, to an outward one, to teach, that is, to make someone else learn. Already we can see that Mr. Xu got the kinship between Jue and Xue all way backwards. That is, to learn comes from to be aware and not the other way around. 2. Mr. Xu also wrongfully took Xue and Xiao as the same word with written 2 ways, which going by Baxter and Segard's reconstruction was not the case. Ere we go on, let's go back to the oracle bone script form of xue once more. This earliest form you will call to mind has yao, hexagram over a roof. The roof is often taken to be the roof of a school building. However, in the oracle bone script, the roof radical is written the same as the character liu, 6. This is because the character 6 at the earliest meant hut or cottage, now written like this and pronounced as lu, and was only borrowed for the same sounding word 6. Why do I bring this up, you ask? Well, the reconstructed reading for liu is kruk, which you'll see is an almost perfect match for the reconstructed Old Chinese reading of jue, kruk, meaning there is a high likelihood that the so-called roof in the character xue is indeed the phonetic element, or mayhap fulfilling both a semantic and phonetic role, a sort of Schrodinger's radical, if you pardon the expression, being both a roof as well as standing for the reading. Apart from that, this would suggest that the Shang era character may have been used for both jue and xue, which might solve the riddle as to why we don't have a character for jue to be aware or jiao to be awaken until the Qin dynasty. As for that, the one character was a good enough phonetic match for all of these words.
Alright, now let's get on with the House of Jiao.
Jiao has been giving me a lot of headaches since I began researching this episode, but ere we delve into my personal hang-ups, let's first see what Mr. Schussler and Baxter and Sagart have to say. First of all, Schussler only lists the 4th tone reading, Jiao, in his ABC etymological dictionary, while also mentioning that xiao, to imitate, to follow, that is, to be taught, is an offshoot thereof. Baxter and Sagart has reconstructed forms for both the pronunciations. Jiao, to teach, is reconstructed as skro, and the 4th tone, jiao, teaching, is reconstructed as skros, with a noun making s suffix tacked on at the end, which is the root of the 4th tone. They also reconstruct xiao, to imitate, to follow, as mkros. Already the iron-eyed among you will have spotted a few issues here. First and foremost, Chauvin only has the 4th tone reading, gu xiao qie, and makes no distinction between the verb to teach and the noun teaching. The later Kangxi dictionary compiled all the readings of earlier dictionaries, and here we see both the 4th and 1st tone readings, but the Kangxi word book also notes that the meanings are identical.
Another issue is xiao, to imitate, to follow, reconstructed as mkros. But if, as Schussler suggests, it is derived from jiao, to teach, then surely we should expect an s prefix in there somewhere, like mskros.
Now, I do have a solution to both of these issues, but I'll be requiring you all to put on your finest tinfoil hats and get your thumbtacks and string ready for this one. Alright, so the Chauvin lists an otherwise unattested word, jiao, meaning to imitate. The reading is according to Kangxi identical to jiao, to cross, which in Baxter and Sagart's reconstruction is kra, which you'll see is almost the same as jiao, to teach, skra, if you take away the s at the start. My hypothesis, read crackpot headcanon, is a bit of a stretch, but hear me out.
If we suppose jiao, to imitate, is the missing root word for the jiao house of words, then skro, or jiao, to teach, is kra with an s suffix tacked on, the s suffix increasing valency of a verb, making it either transitive, taking an object, or causative. Thus we can understand skro, or jiao, as to make someone imitate, i.e. to teach. Next, Baxter and Sagart reconstruct the noun jiao, teaching, as skros, that is, skro, jiao, to teach, with an s suffix, turning it into a noun. So far so good, but here is where it gets wild, my friends.
To reconcile that there seem to be two jiao, a noun teaching and a verb to instruct to guide, wherefore Kangxi and other word books treat the 1st and 4th readings as the same, I also wish to put forth another offshoot word, which I'll be calling jiao tu. Jiao tu would be derived from kro, jiao, to imitate, with the other kind of s suffix, that is, the one that turns inward verbs into outward verbs, same as with mkruk, xue, to learn, and mkruks, xiao, to teach in the other house. This jiao tu, electric boogaloo, or karos, would also mean to teach, and following sound changes would make it sound the same as the noun jiao, which would explain why Kangxi almost dismissively goes same but different. Lastly, xiao, mkros, to imitate, could easily be derived from jiao tu, cross with an M prefix, same as how kruk, 学, to learn, is derived from kruk, 觉, to be aware. Again, I have no evidence for any of this, but I think it would resolve some of the issues in Schussler's etymology.
And that's a wrap.
I'm sorry this episode took so long to come out,
but I've been busy.
This video started out as a defense of my reading of Jiao to teach in the 4th tone, way back in episode 1 of Classical Chinese for Beginners. Well, slap my ass and call me Alice if that didn't lead me down a massive rabbit hole of etymology and research.
In the end, I will concede that yes, in modern Mandarin, the two readings ought to be separate.
But as far as Classical Chinese is concerned, I will be reading the verb and the noun in the 4th tone unless otherwise specified, because as the Kongxi word book already points out, in Classical Chinese, both readings mean the same. Oh, but what do I know? I'm just a Swedish phonology nerd after all.
Thank you all so much for watching, and a special, massive shout out to all the honorable members of the Chinese Merchant Guild who help fund these videos. You're all absolute legends, and if you wish to see more of these videos, push the like and subscribe buttons or support me on Patreon. You're all truly wonderful. Until next time, scholars.